Gabriel Georges Coury. June 13, 1896 – February 2, 1956. Coury was an English recipient of the Victoria Cross, the highest and most prestigious award for gallantry in the face of the enemy that can be awarded to British and Commonwealth forces. Born on June 13, 1896 in Liverpool to Lebanese parents, he was educated at Stonyhurst College from 1907 to 1913. He worked as an apprentice in a cotton brokerage when the war broke out. Coury volunteered to join Kitchener's New Army in 1914. While he was a second lieutenant in the 3rd Battalion, the South Lancashire Regiment, the Prince of Wales's Volunteers, attached to the 1/4th Battalion, South Lancashire Regiment, the Pioneer Battalion of the 55th, West Lancashire, Infantry Division, he performed deeds on August 8, 1916, near Arrowhead Copse, France, for which he was awarded the V.C. His actions also earned him a promotion to full lieutenant. His citation reads, "For most conspicuous bravery. During an advance he was in command of 2 platoons ordered to dig a communication trench from the firing line to the position 1. By his fine example and utter contempt of danger he kept up the spirits of his men and completed his task under intense fire. Later, after his battalion had suffered severe casualties and the commanding officer had been wounded, he went out in front of the advanced position in broad daylight and in full view of the enemy found his commanding officer, and brought him back to the new advanced trench over ground swept by machine gun fire. He not only carried out his original tasks and saved his commanding officer, but also assisted in rallying the attacking troops when they were shaken and in leading them forward."
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome to this commemoration today. We gather together to remember all those who were involved in the Battle of the Somme, but especially today to recall the outstanding courage and bravery of 2nd Lieutenant Gabriel George Coury of the South Lancashire Regiment, a son of our city of Liverpool. And we do so on this centenary day of those events for which he so rightly received the Victoria Cross. With him we honour the memory of those who inhabited that war-shattered landscape, those who endured so much in the midst of human suffering, those who showed great courage and loyalty to comrades at arms, for all who were engaged in combat, for those who tended the maimed and the injured, for the fallen, and for those families who still hold the memories of deceased relatives. We ask for God's mercy, and for ourselves we ask for grace to remember. And so we pray. Eternal God, our refuge and strength, on this day we remember before you Gabriel George Coury, and all who experienced the Battle of the Somme, those who faced the terrible waste and devastation, who fought against all the odds. We recall with thanksgiving the loyalty shown to comrades and the bravery of those who overcame their fear, the courage of those who daily faced the pounding of artillery, gunfire and shrapnel. May we never forget the devastating loss of this battle, the anxiety on the home front, and the sacrifices that were made. Through our remembrance today, strengthen our resolve to oppose aggression, to defend the weak, and to speak your word of peace in times of conflict and insecurity. This we ask in the name of the Prince of Peace, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen. It's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce the Lord Mayor of Liverpool, Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Helen Davis. Family of Gabriel Coury, VC, Reverend Sirs, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. For many, August is a time of pleasure and enjoyment, a time for summer holidays and for spending time with friends and family. This year, however, we're remembering a very different August in 1916, when the conflict in World War I greatly affected family life and local communities across countries worldwide. Later this week, we had to travel to France to lay a new memorial to our Liverpool pals and the King's regiments who fell at Guillemont at the Battle of the Somme. It should be remembered that because of the exorbitant cost of travel in those post-war days, very few relatives ever got to grieve at the graveside of their loved ones, even if there was a known grave for them. My consort and I felt it was important during this centennial year that we marked their sacrifice with respect on behalf of all those Liverpool relatives who never got the opportunity to do that. Many people think of the first day of the Somme on the 1st of July, when over 19,000 people died. But we often forget that the battle went on until November, and the total loss of life is calculated at over 1 million people of all nations. Today, though, we honour the local impact of the Great War and the bravery and the selfless actions of Gabriel Coury, who was born at 16 Croxteth Grove, only a very short distance from where we stand today. How fitting that we gather in a park where generations have been able to enjoy the freedom that was fought for all those years ago. A peaceful place where we can now reflect and give thanks to Gabriel and others who gave so much for their country and our liberty. 100 years ago today, Gabriel Coury was awarded Britain's highest military honour, the Victoria Cross, for most conspicuous bravery. Today I am truly privileged to unveil this commemorative stone in honour of this local hero. And I hope that this stone continues to educate local communities and young people about the important role that Gabriel and this area played in World War I. I'd now like to invite Bill Sargent to tell us more about Gabriel Coury, BC.
I've got about half an hour's story to tell you here, so if you don't mind, I'll skip that preamble. Talk straight away about Gabriel George Coury, VC. Born, as our Lord Mayor's just said, within a stone's throw of here, the cross here, at Croxteth Grove, number 16, on the 13th of June, 1896. The second of 6 children born to Raphael and Marie Coury. His father and grandfather worked in the cotton trade in Liverpool, but sadly Gabriel's father died when he was only a young boy. That's Gabriel, not the father, in 1903. Gabriel was educated at St Francis Xavier School in Salisbury Street in Liverpool, before starting at Stonyhurst College, a Roman Catholic independent school run by Jesuits, in May 1907. He left Stonyhurst in April 1913 and took up an apprenticeship with Messrs Reynolds and Gibson, cotton brokers in Liverpool. But on the declaration of war on the 4th of August 1914, Gabriel decided that he should enlist, and did so as a rifleman in the 2nd 6th Battalion of the King's Liverpool Regiment. Interestingly, Stonyhurst College produced 7 old boys who were awarded a Victoria Cross. But Gabriel was the only one of those who enlisted in wartime, and actually enlisted as a private. Following his initial training, however, he applied for and was granted a commission in the South Lancashire Regiment, and arrived in France in August 1915 as a 2nd Lieutenant with the 4th Battalion, the Pioneer Battalion. After a relatively quiet introduction to the fighting, Gabriel found himself and his battalion, as part of the 55th West Lancashire Division, heavily involved in what was to become known as the Battle of the Somme. In late July 1916, the 4th South Lancs took their place in the front line as part of the struggle to take the village of Guillemont following a number of unsuccessful assaults. By 28th of July, he and his men were at Fricourt, working in the forward areas around Trones, were busily digging trenches from the woods towards Guillemont village. German resistance was intense, And on the 5th of August that year, during a heavy German bombardment, Gabriel was sheltering in a British trench when German shells landed close by and set fire to a number of very lights, which exploded. The explosion caused Gabriel's troops to panic, with some attempting to leave the trench, thinking that the Germans had launched a bombing raid. Gabriel took control of the situation and got his men back into their positions, and during the ensuing very heavy bombardment, he patrolled the trench at great risk to himself, restoring confidence and good order. Just 3 days later, a further attack on Guillemot was launched, with Gabriel's pioneers in close support of the infantry, digging communication trenches from their newly won positions back to the front line. His company was divided into two sections, with his section working alongside the 1st Fort King's Own, in ground which was constantly raked by machine gun and artillery fire, which meant that the attack eventually broke down. Despite this vicious machine gun fire, which cost the Fort South ranks 2 officers killed, another officer and 47 other ranks wounded, and 5 reported missing, Gabriel's section managed to dig 100 yards of trench, 5 foot deep, within 1 hour. Eventually, the Allied troops were ordered to withdraw, leaving many of their wounded in no man's land. Gabriel Coury, however, risked death and went out onto the battlefield to rescue his wounded commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Swainson, whom he brought back to safety. Coury then organised his troops to fend off a German counterattack. Sadly, Colonel Swainson died within 2 hours of being rescued. At that time, Gabriel Coury was barely 20 years of age, and his valour was recognised by the award of the Victoria Cross. You'll shortly hear the citation which accompanied this award, but I sometimes feel that such citations scarcely do justice to the events they describe. In this case, we have the advantage of an eyewitness report written by one of his men and published in the Liverpool Daily Post on the 30th of October 1916, in which he said, "He was the bravest officer I ever served under. He showed absolute contempt for death and made us all feel that a dozen deaths were as nothing compared with the need to complete the task given to us. It was when we got into the captured position that Lieutenant Coury showed what he was capable of. We had gone through a hellish ordeal. A lot of our officers and men lay out there in the open, wounded. It blew hurricanes of fire across the open ground and seemed to invite certain death to go out there. Lieutenant Coury started out under fiendish fire. The enemy's snipers were after him from the first, but he ran right on, regardless of the hail of bullets flying around him. He started back again, carrying our commander. That journey back was one of the most thrilling sights I've ever seen. The enemy redoubled their efforts to pick off our brave officer as he toiled painfully towards our trench. The machine guns were turned on full blast, and it was nothing short of a miracle that the lieutenant was able to make his way through it at all. All were loud in their praise of our lieutenant. Undoubtedly, he saved the day at its most critical stage. But that's not quite the end of Gabriel Coury's story. In late August 1916, he was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. 12 months later, having volunteered in atrocious weather to ferry aeroplanes from the UK to the front line in France, and flying at low level towards the Channel, his wings struck a flagpole and his plane crashed, igniting the fuel tank. Gabriel sustained severe burns to his arms, legs and face. However, he recovered from his injuries, and in January 19 was married. In April 1918 he returned to flying, but a month later crashed again. After another spell in hospital, he was, not surprisingly perhaps, given a desk job with the RAF. After the war, Gabriel returned to work in the cotton trade, but in 1939 he was still on the Army Officers Reserve List, and in January 1940 he enlisted in the Royal Army Service Corps. In 1944 he took part in the Normandy invasion, in which he saw action in France, and is buried in the family grave in the churchyard of St Peter and St Paul's in Crosby. Strangely, I might unwittingly have met Gabriel Coury. In 1949, I started at Liverpool Collegiate School in Shaw Street, which is just round the corner from Brunswick Road. But on many occasions, instead of spending my money on school dinners as I was supposed to, I'd walk up to the chip shop in Brunswick Road. I like to think that Gabriel might have served me sometime. If so, how I wish that I'd known then what I know about him now.
This commemoration stone is in honour of Gabriel Coury. Born 1896 to 1956, he was awarded the Victoria Cross on the 8th of August 1916. Gabriel Coury was born at 16 Croxteth Grove in 1896. He was born into a family of cotton brokers, was educated at St Francis Xavier School and Stonehurst College before enlisting as a private in the 6th Battalion, the King's Liverpool Regiment. He was later granted a commission to the South Lancashire Regiment, the Prince of Wales Volunteers. And in August 1916, during the Battle of Somme, the 55th Division was ordered to attack the German-held village of Gladden. On the 8th of August, 2nd Lieutenant Coury was in command of a half company of pioneers attached to the 4th Battalion, the King's Own, Royal Lancaster. And it was during this action that he earned the Victoria Cross, the highest and most prestigious award for gallantry in the face of the enemy. 2nd Lieutenant Coury's citation in the London Gazette reads, "For most conspicuous bravery during an advance, he was in command of 2 platoons ordered to dig a communications trench from the old firing line to the positions wood. By his fine example and his utter contempt for danger, he kept up the spirits of his men and completed his task under heavy fire. Later, after the battalion with whom he was working had suffered severe casualties and his commanding officer had been wounded, he went out in front of the advanced position, and in full view of the enemy, he found the commanding officer and brought him back to safety over ground swept with machine gun fire. He not only completed his original task and saved the commanding officer, but he also succeeded in rallying the attacking troops when they were shaken and leading them forward."
Carry
grow, not old, as we are our left grow old. Age shall not weary them, or the years them. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
When you go home, tell them of us and say, your tomorrow, we gave our today.
Sing together the hymn, Abide with Me.